My parents said, "You are dead to us now. Never come back." I stood frozen, staring at the locked door. 1 week later, I got an urgent email from their lawyer. "We have a massive problem. My name is Nora. I am 28 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I have been the ghost haunting my own family's house. If you were to look at us from the outside, living in our massive, pristine home in Missoula, Montana, you would think we were the picture of American success. My parents built Thorn Events from the ground up. It is an upscale event planning company, the kind that handles $500,000 weddings and corporate galas where people drink champagne that costs more than my monthly grocery budget. My mother, Evelyn, is the general of this empire. She does not just walk into a room, she occupies it, commanding attention and obedience with nothing but a sharp glare. She built her life on the idea of absolute control. My father, Cameron, is her shadow. He handles the accounting and the paperwork, but mostly, he just nods. His silence has always been louder to me than my mother's shouting. He is the ultimate enabler, a man who would rather watch his own house burn down than argue with his wife about the temperature of the flames. And then there is Carter, my older brother. 33 years old, impeccably dressed, and possessing the kind of superficial charm that makes clients hand over their credit cards without looking at the final bill. Carter is the golden child. In my mother's eyes, he is the undisputed heir to the Thorn legacy. He has an office with a view, a salary that affords him a luxury lifestyle, and a free pass to do absolutely whatever he wants. I, on the other hand, was the unpaid intern who never got promoted. I was the one steaming tablecloths at midnight, answering angry emails from brides, and picking up the pieces every time Carter dropped the ball. And believe me, he dropped the ball constantly. But in my family, Carter's mistakes were simply learning opportunities, while my existence felt like an inconvenience. The control my mother had over me wasn't just emotional, it was deeply financial. When I turned 18, she marched me down to the bank and made me open what she called the Sibling Emergency Fund. I put every dime I made from my summer jobs into it. Eventually, it held my entire life savings, exactly $5,000. But Evelyn insisted that Carter's name had to be on the account. She told me, right in front of the bank teller, that I was too flighty, too irresponsible with my head in the clouds, and that Carter needed to oversee my finances to make sure I didn't waste it all on what she called my stupid little movie ideas. I believed her. When you are gaslit from the moment you learn to speak, you start to believe that you really are broken. You start to think that the cage they put you in is actually a protective embrace. I thought that keeping Carter on the account was just how families looked out for each other. I had no idea it was a trap. I never wanted to plan weddings. I never cared about floral arrangements or the exact shade of ivory for a napkin ring. I wanted to write. I wanted to create worlds, draft screenplays, and tell stories about people who fought their way out of the darkness. Writing was my oxygen. I vividly remember a Tuesday afternoon when I was 12 years old. I had been sitting at the kitchen table, furiously writing a story in a cheap spiral notebook. My mother came up behind me, snatched the notebook from my hands, and skimmed the pages. Her face twisted in disgust. She didn't just tell me to stop. She ripped the notebook in half and threw it into the trash can. She told me that dreams do not pay the mortgage, and that I needed to stop living in a fantasy world and start pulling my weight in reality. I cried for 3 days straight. But there was one person who saw me. Grandma Cora. My father's mother. Cora Montgomery was everything my parents were not. She was warm, fiercely independent, and completely unimpressed by Evelyn's obsession with status. A few weeks after the notebook incident, Grandma Cora called me over to her house. Her place always smelled like peppermint tea and old paper. She led me into her study and pointed to a heavy, vintage typewriter sitting on a sturdy oak desk. She had bought it at an antique shop just for me. She sat me down, put her soft, wrinkled hands over mine, and said words that I would repeat to myself like a prayer for the rest of my life. She said, "Your stories are your armor, Nora. Do not let them strip it away from you. The world needs your voice, even if this family is too deaf to hear it." For years, Grandma Cora's house was my sanctuary. We would spend hours watching old movies, dissecting dialogue, and talking about character arcs. She was the only person who ever asked me what I wanted to do with my life without following it up with a lecture. But 2 years ago, Grandma Cora passed away. The day she died, a massive part of me died with her. The silence she left behind was unbearable, and without her shield, I was fully exposed to my mother's tyranny. After Cora's funeral, I had to move back into my parents' house because the independent film project I was working on in Seattle lost its funding. I was broke, exhausted, and grieving. I hid my screenwriting pitches in a locked, password-protected folder on my laptop. I would work 12-hour shifts for Thorn Events, come home, lock my bedroom door, and type until my fingers went numb. Every rejection email I got from a studio felt like a confirmation of my mother's words, but I kept going. I had to. Grandma Cora believed in me, and I couldn't let her down. The tension in the house was a ticking time bomb, and it finally detonated at the end of October during the biggest event of the year. Thorn Events had secured a massive corporate tech gala. It was a career-defining contract. Carter was supposedly managing the catering logistics, which meant he was actually out drinking with his friends while I did all the heavy lifting. On the night of the gala, with 500 VIP guests expecting a 5-course meal, disaster struck. The main catering trucks didn't show up. I frantically called the vendor, only to discover that Carter had never actually paid the final invoice or confirmed the delivery time. He had completely forgotten. Panic erupted backstage. When Evelyn found out, her face turned the color of ash. Carter, smooth and completely devoid of guilt, immediately went into damage control. But he didn't fix the problem, he deflected it. Right there, in the middle of the crowded prep kitchen, with the client standing only a few feet away, Carter pointed directly at me. He put on his best fake stressed voice and said, "I told Nora to wire the funds on Tuesday. I cannot believe she dropped the ball on something this crucial. I am so sorry, I will handle this." I stood there, my mouth open in shock. "Carter, you never told me to do that. You explicitly said you were handling the catering budget." I shot back, my voice trembling. I looked at my father, Cameron, who had been copied on every email. He knew the truth. He knew Carter was lying. I met my dad's eyes, silently begging him to speak up, to defend me just once. But my father looked away. He stared at his clipboard, choosing peace with his wife over the truth for his daughter. Then, my mother stepped in. She didn't ask for my side of the story. She grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging into my skin, and pulled me in front of the furious client. "Apologize to him, Nora," she hissed. "Apologize for your incompetence right now." I was forced to stand there, humiliated, fighting back tears, and take the blame for my brother's negligence. I choked out an apology, swallowing every ounce of my dignity. That night, driving back home in the freezing rain, I felt a kind of exhaustion that goes straight to the bone. I realized then that my family did not just misunderstand me. They actively needed me to be the failure so that Carter could look like the hero. I was their human shield, their designated punching bag. The only thing keeping me alive was a tiny, secret spark of hope. 2 days prior, I had finally gotten a callback email from a small, independent production studio in Seattle. They wanted to discuss producing one of my short film scripts. It wasn't a done deal, but it was a crack of light in a pitch-black room. I just needed to hold on a little longer. It was Friday night, 2 days after the gala disaster. Family dinners at the Thorn household were always suffocating, but this one felt like a trial. The dining room was silent except for the clinking of silverware against expensive china. I pushed my food around my plate, feeling the heavy stares of my parents. Suddenly, Evelyn reached into her designer tote bag and pulled out a thick stack of papers, slamming it onto the center of the mahogany table. "What is this?" I asked, my heart beginning to race. "It is an employment contract," Evelyn said, her voice cold and absolute. "Carter and I had a long talk today. Your performance at the gala was unacceptable, Nora. But because you are family, we are giving you one last chance. This contract ties you to the logistics department of Thorn Events permanently. It outlines your hours, your duties, and your restrictions. You will stop this childish obsession with writing your little movies, and you will dedicate your life to the family business. Sign it. I stared at the papers. It wasn't an employment contract, it was a prison sentence. It was a legal document designed to strip away the last remaining pieces of my identity. I looked up at her, my hands shaking. I am not signing that. I am not giving up my writing, Mom. In fact, I just got a call back from a studio in Seattle. They actually want to talk about producing my script. I have a real shot at this. Carter let out a loud, mocking laugh. He leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine. A callback? What are they offering to pay you in exposure? Keep dreaming, Nora, but do not expect a paycheck. You are 30 years old and still playing make-believe. It is pathetic. I am 28, Carter, I snapped, the anger finally boiling over. And at least I am trying to build something real instead of stealing credit for other people's work to cover up my own sheer incompetence. Nora, that is enough, my father yelled, finally finding his voice, but only to silence me. Stop upsetting your mother. She is trying to help you. We're all trying to save you from yourself. Just sign the paper and be grateful. Grateful, I screamed, standing up so fast my chair tipped over and crashed onto the hardwood floor. Grateful for what? For being the scapegoat? For being treated like garbage so your precious golden boy can feel important? You are completely blind, Dad. And you, Mom, you don't want a daughter. You want a servant. The room went dead silent. Evelyn stood up slowly. She didn't yell. She didn't scream. Her face was completely devoid of emotion, which was far more terrifying. She looked at me not like a mother looking at her child, but like a CEO looking at a terminated employee. If you will not serve this family, Evelyn said, every word dripping with ice, then you are no longer a part of it. If you walk out of that door, you are stripped of our name. You are dead to us now. Never come back. I froze. My breath hitched in my throat. What are you talking about? It is freezing outside. Where am I supposed to go? I do not care, Evelyn replied, turning her back to me. Carter, get her out of my sight. Carter stood up, a sickening smirk plastered across his face. He walked over, grabbed my arm with brutal force, and physically dragged me toward the front door. I struggled, yelling for my father, begging him to do something, to stop this madness. But Cameron just sat there, staring at his plate, letting his only daughter be thrown away like trash. Carter shoved me out onto the front porch. I stumbled and fell hard onto the concrete steps, scraping my knees. Before I could even stand up, my single duffel bag of clothes came flying out, hitting me in the chest. Have fun in Hollywood, loser, Carter sneered, and then he slammed the heavy oak door shut. A second later, I heard the distinct, heavy click of the deadbolt locking into place. I sat there on the freezing concrete, the sharp Montana wind cutting right through my thin sweater. I pulled out my keys with trembling hands, trying desperately to unlock the door, but the key would not turn. They had engaged the interior security lock. The key was completely useless in my hand. I banged my fists against the wood, screaming for them to open up, crying until my throat was raw. But no one came. The house remained dark and silent. It was 8:30 at night. The temperature was dropping fast. With no car, no heavy winter coat, and nowhere to go, I hoisted my duffel bag over my shoulder and started walking. I walked for 40 agonizing minutes down the dark highway, the wind biting my face, my tears freezing on my cheeks. Every step was a realization that the people who were supposed to love me the most had just discarded me without a second thought. I finally reached a rundown, flickering neon sign of a cheap roadside motel. I paid for one night in cash, walked into the dingy room that smelled like stale smoke and desperation, collapsed onto the stiff mattress, and cried until I passed out. I woke up the next morning feeling like I had been hit by a freight train. My eyes were swollen shut, my body ached, and reality hit me like a bucket of ice water. I was homeless. I was utterly alone. I tried to push the panic down. I told myself to think logically. I had my sibling emergency fund. $5,000 wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to get an apartment, buy a cheap used car, and survive while I kept pitching my scripts. I would be okay. I had to be okay. I walked down to the motel lobby to get a cup of the terrible complimentary coffee. I swiped my debit card to pay for a stale muffin, but the machine beeped angrily. Declined. I frowned. I tried it again. Declined. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. I stepped aside, pulled out my phone, and opened my banking app. I waited for the loading circle to spin, my heart hammering against my ribs. The screen loaded. Available balance, $0. I stopped breathing. I stared at the screen, tapping it violently as if the numbers would somehow magically change. But they remained zero. I clicked on the transaction history. Right there, timestamped at 11:30 the previous night, just 3 hours after I was thrown out of the house, was a transfer. An outgoing transfer of exactly $5,000. The recipient account belonged to Carter Thorne. My hands shook so violently I nearly dropped the phone. I dialed the bank's customer service number, pacing the motel parking lot. When a teller named Daisy finally answered, I practically screamed into the receiver. My money is gone. Somebody stole my money. You need to reverse the transaction right now. Ma'am, please calm down, Daisy said sympathetically. She pulled up my file. I see the transaction you're referring to. It was initiated by the joint account holder, Carter Thorne. Because his name is legally on the account, he has full authorization to withdraw or transfer any funds at any time. There is no fraud here, ma'am. It is completely legal. I am so sorry. I hung up the phone. The world started to spin. It wasn't enough for them to kick me out into the freezing night. Carter had to make sure I had absolutely nothing. He had stolen years of my hard work, every penny I had saved, just to ensure I would be forced to crawl back to them on my hands and knees. Rage, hot and blinding, replaced the sorrow. I dialed my mother's number. It went straight to voicemail. I dialed my father. Voicemail. I texted Carter, "You thief. Give me my money back right now." A little red exclamation point appeared next to the text. Message not delivered. They had all blocked me. Every single one of them. They had coordinated a complete and total erasure of my existence. I was stranded in a cheap motel with no money, no family, and no safety net. I slid down the brick wall of the motel building, buried my face in my hands, and let the total, crushing weight of the betrayal break me. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit the subscribe button, like the video, and leave a comment with the name of the city you live in. Every comment helps the video reach more viewers. Thank you so much. The next 7 days were a masterclass in human suffering. I learned very quickly that rock bottom is not a solid floor, it is a trapdoor that keeps opening into darker, colder rooms. I was completely alone in a rundown motel room on the outskirts of Missoula, watching my life evaporate before my eyes. Every morning, I woke up to the sound of 18-wheelers rumbling down the highway, shaking the thin walls of my room. Every night, I went to sleep wearing 3 layers of clothing because the heater was broken and the Montana autumn chill seeped through the cracked window panes. Survival became a terrifying math equation. My checking account had exactly $42.16 left in it. I lived on instant ramen noodles that I softened under the hot water tap in the bathroom sink. But $42 does not buy you a week in a motel, even a terrible one. On the 3rd day, the manager knocked on my door, demanding payment for the rest of the week. I had nothing to give him. I sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress and opened my duffel bag. Inside, carefully folded at the bottom, was a heavy, vintage wool coat. Grandma Cora had given it to me on my 21st birthday. It was the only thing of actual monetary value that I owned. It smelled faintly of her perfume, a soft mix of lavender and old paper. Holding it brought tears to my eyes, hot and fast. I cried into the collar, apologizing to a woman who had been dead for 2 years. Then I walked 3 miles in the freezing wind to a pawn shop downtown. The man behind the counter offered me $150 for it. I knew it was worth at least $500, but desperation does not negotiate. I took the cash, walked back to the motel, and paid the manager. I had bought myself a few more days of a roof over my head. The psychological toll was far worse than the hunger or the cold. I spent hours sitting on the floor, staring at the blank wall, running the argument at the dinner table over and over in my head. A toxic family does not just break your heart, they break your perception of reality. I found myself actually wondering if they were right. Was I too stubborn? Was I really a failure? If I just walked back to their massive house, got down on my knees, and signed that employment contract, I would be warm again. I would have food. I would have my $5,000 back. All I had to do was surrender my soul, my passion, and my entire identity. But every time I reached for my phone to unblock them, I heard Grandma Cora's voice. I remembered the way she looked at me when I typed on that vintage typewriter. She believed I was meant for something greater than being a corporate servant. I realized I was not mourning the family that had kicked me out. I was mourning the family I had always wished I had. I was grieving for the mother who should have hugged me, the father who should have protected me, and the brother who should have been my friend. Once I accepted that those people did not actually exist, a strange, hollow calmness washed over me. I decided I would rather freeze on the street than go back to that house. By the 8th day, the hunger was a constant, dull ache in my stomach, and the pawn shop money was almost entirely gone. I was sitting on the stained carpet, using the motel's terrible free Wi-Fi to fill out an online application for a late-night barista shift at a local coffee shop. I was typing my resume when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was an email notification. I assumed it was another rejection from a film studio or a spam message. I swiped down on the screen to read it. The sender's name was Nathaniel Reed, attorney at law. I blinked, my exhausted brain struggling to process the words. I opened the email. The subject line read, "Urgent, the Cora Montgomery Trust." My heart completely stopped. The text in the body of the email was incredibly brief, but it hit me like a physical blow. It said, "Nora, I was notified of your address change from the family estate through our automated property monitoring system. We have a massive problem. Call me immediately at this number." I stared at the screen for a full minute. Trust? What trust? Grandma Cora never mentioned a trust to me. I took a deep, shaky breath, tapped the phone number on the screen, and held the phone to my ear. It rang twice before a deep, authoritative voice answered. Nathaniel Reed speaking. "Hello, Mr. Reed," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "This is Nora Thorne. I got your email." Nora. Thank goodness, Nathaniel sighed, sounding genuinely relieved. "I have been trying to locate you for a week. As the executor of your late grandmother's estate, I received an automated red flag alert from the city utility board. Your parents abruptly removed your name from the residency registry of the Thorne family house. When I tried to contact your mother to ask why, she dodged my calls. Where are you right now?" "I am at a motel off Highway 93, I admitted, the shame burning my cheeks. "My parents kicked me out. My brother emptied my emergency bank account. I have absolutely nothing." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. When Nathaniel finally spoke, his voice was tight with suppressed anger. "They kicked you out. Evelyn actually kicked you out of that house." "Yes," I said, wiping a tear from my eye. "She told me I was dead to them." "Nora," Nathaniel said slowly, emphasizing every single syllable. "Your grandmother, Cora, set up a highly confidential trust fund specifically for you before she passed away. That trust owns a significant financial stake in that very house, which guarantees your legal right to live there. Furthermore, the trust contains a large sum of liquid assets designed to fund your housing and your screenwriting career, so that you would never have to depend on Evelyn or Cameron." I nearly dropped the phone. The room started to spin. I do not understand. If there was a trust, why didn't I know about it? Why didn't anyone tell me? "Because," Nathaniel said grimly, "your parents were appointed as the initial estate managers. They were legally obligated to inform you. They hid it from you. And based on the emergency audit I ran yesterday after seeing the residency alert, hiding it was not the only thing they did. Do not speak to your family. Do not answer their calls. I am coming to you right now. We need to meet." Nathaniel Reed arrived at the greasy diner across the street from my motel exactly an hour later. He was a tall, distinguished man in his late 50s, wearing a sharp charcoal suit that looked entirely out of place in a diner that smelled like old frying oil. He slid into the vinyl booth across from me, ordered us 2 black coffees, and placed a massive, thick manila folder on the table. He didn't start with the legal jargon. Instead, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a smaller, sealed envelope. The handwriting on the front was elegant, cursive, and heartbreakingly familiar. Before we discuss the finances, Nathaniel said softly, pushing the envelope toward me, "Cora wanted you to have this. She gave it to me 3 years ago, with strict instructions to deliver it to you only if you were ever separated from your parents." My hands trembled as I took the envelope. I carefully broke the wax seal and pulled out the single sheet of thick parchment paper. "My dearest Nora," the letter began. "If you are reading this, my worst fears have come true, and Evelyn has tried to break your beautiful spirit. I have watched your mother try to mold you into a corporate servant for years. I have watched your father stand by in cowardly silence. I always knew your heart belonged to your stories, and I knew that one day, they would try to force you to choose between your passion and your family. This trust is my final gift to you. It is your armor. It is your freedom. The funds are yours to claim. Do not let them control you anymore. Write your movies, my brave girl. Write your own ending. I am always with you." I pressed a hand over my mouth, sobbing quietly right there in the diner. The warmth of her love reached out from beyond the grave and wrapped around me. She had known. She had seen the toxic dynamic in my house, and she had spent her final years quietly building a fortress to protect me. "Take your time," Nathaniel said gently. After a few minutes, I wiped my face with a paper napkin, took a sip of the bitter coffee, and looked him in the eye. "Tell me what they did." Nathaniel opened the thick file. "Your grandmother left enough money in the trust to buy you a house and fund your living expenses for a decade. However, because of your age when she drafted it, she appointed your parents as the temporary managers. The money was supposed to be released to you in increments to support your career." Evelyn and Carter found a legal loophole. He slid a stack of bank statements across the table. 2 years ago, Thorne Events hit a massive financial crisis. They were on the verge of bankruptcy. To save their own company, Evelyn and Carter drafted fraudulent documents claiming that Thorne Events was, in fact, your career. Under the guise of investing in your professional future, they systematically siphoned $250,000 out of your trust fund over the last 24 months. I stared at the highlighted numbers on the bank statements. $250,000. While I was steaming tablecloths at midnight, while they were telling me I was a worthless dreamer who needed to pull my weight, they were secretly stealing $250,000 of my inheritance to fund their luxurious lifestyle and save their failing business. Carter's expensive suits. Evelyn's designer bags. My father's silence. It was all paid for with Grandma Cora's money. The sadness inside me instantly evaporated. The tears dried up. A cold, calculating rage ignited in my chest, burning hotter than anything I had ever felt in my life. They had kicked me out into the freezing cold over an employment contract, knowing full well they had robbed me blind. I looked up at Nathaniel. My voice was completely steady. "I want every single penny back. I want the house. I want the money. Burn them down to the ground." It took exactly 3 days for Nathaniel to set the trap. He sent a formal legal summons to my parents and brother, requesting their mandatory presence at his downtown Missoula law firm regarding an urgent discrepancy in the Cora Montgomery estate. He did not mention that I had been found. He did not mention the audit. He let them walk in completely blind. I sat in the massive, glass-walled conference room at the end of a long mahogany table. I was wearing a clean, pressed blouse that Nathaniel's assistant had kindly helped me purchase, and my posture was completely straight. I was no longer the frightened girl crying outside a locked door. I was the storm they didn't see coming. At precisely 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the heavy glass doors swung open. Evelyn walked in first, radiating her usual arrogant energy, carrying a ridiculously expensive leather handbag. Cameron followed, looking down at his shoes as always. Finally, Carter strolled in. He was wearing a custom-tailored suit, and on his left wrist, I spotted a brand-new, gleaming gold Rolex watch. My money bought that watch. They stopped dead in their tracks when they saw me sitting at the table. Evelyn's haughty expression faltered for a fraction of a second, but she quickly recovered, masking her shock with a sneer of pure condescension. Well, Evelyn said, crossing her arms and looking down her nose at me. I suppose reality finally set in. You realized that your little Hollywood dreams cannot pay for a warm bed. I am surprised you lasted a whole week out there, Nora. Carter laughed, pulling out a leather chair and aggressively throwing himself into it. Look at her, Mom. She looks exhausted. I told you she would come crawling back to the adults when she got hungry enough. I hope you enjoyed your little temper tantrum, Nora. Cameron just looked at me, a brief flash of guilt crossing his eyes before he looked away, nervously rubbing the back of his neck. If you are here to beg for your room back, Evelyn continued, taking a seat directly across from me, we have conditions. We are willing to forgive your atrocious behavior at the dinner table. But you will sign that employment contract today, and you will formally apologize to your brother for calling him incompetent. We are a family, Nora. We take care of our own, but we demand respect. I did not say a word. I did not yell. I did not cry. I just sat there, looking at them with utter detachment. I let them dig their own graves with their arrogant, manipulative words. I let them build their glass house of ego, knowing I held the sledgehammer. At that moment, Nathaniel Reed walked into the conference room. He was carrying a stack of files so thick he had to use both hands. He dropped the files onto the mahogany table with a loud, heavy thud that made Carter jump. Nobody is signing an employment contract today, Evelyn, Nathaniel said, his voice cold and sharp as a scalpel. He buttoned his suit jacket and took his place standing at the head of the table. And nobody is begging for forgiveness. In fact, if anyone in this room should be begging for mercy, it is the three of you. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. Excuse me? Who do you think you are talking to, Nathaniel? We manage the Montgomery estate. We are your clients. You are the temporary estate managers, Nathaniel corrected, sliding a document across the table toward her. Your management privileges were officially revoked 72 hours ago when my automated system flagged that you had illegally removed the primary beneficiary from her legal residence. And once I began digging into the financial records to see why you kicked her out, I found exactly what you have been hiding. Nathaniel opened the thickest folder on the table. It was the forensic accounting audit. The Cora Montgomery Trust was established exclusively for Nora's housing stability and creative career, Nathaniel stated, his voice echoing in the silent room. Yet, according to these bank records, $250,000 has been systematically transferred from the trust into the corporate accounts of Thorne Events over the last 2 years. Carter's face went completely pale. The arrogant smirk vanished, replaced by the terrified look of a cornered animal. Evelyn's jaw tightened, but she leaned forward, trying to maintain her illusion of control. That is a ridiculous accusation, Evelyn snapped. Thorne Events is a family business. Nora works for the business. Therefore, injecting capital into the company secures her future. We were investing the trust money into her career exactly as Cora intended. We did nothing illegal. You forged expense reports, Nathaniel countered, sliding copies of the falsified documents toward her. You claimed that the trust funds were being used to pay for Nora's screenwriting seminars, independent film production costs, and living expenses. Instead, the money was used to pay off Thorne Events' corporate debts, purchase new catering vans, and fund Carter's executive bonuses. Nathaniel leaned over the table, locking eyes with my mother. In the eyes of the law, Evelyn, this is not a creative interpretation of a trust fund. It is grand larceny. It is wire fraud. It is embezzlement. And the district attorney, along with the Internal Revenue Service, will be highly interested in how you funded your company with stolen money. The silence in the room was deafening. The sheer weight of the legal threat crushed the oxygen out of the air. Cameron, my father, finally broke. His hands started shaking violently. He looked at me, his eyes wide with panic. Nora, please, Cameron begged, his voice cracking. We were desperate. The company was going under. We thought we could borrow the money and pay it back eventually. We are your family. Please do not do this to us. Think of the family name. I stared at the man who had sat silently while I was thrown out into the freezing night. You did not care about family when I was crying on your front porch, Dad, I said, my voice eerily calm. Your silence was a choice. You chose them over me. You always have. Carter suddenly slammed his hand on the table, trying to regain his dominant posture. You cannot prove anything. You are just an ungrateful brat. We gave you a roof over your head, we fed you, we clothed you, and you want to destroy us over some technicality. You are a pathetic, talentless hack who will never make it in the real world. I slowly stood up from my chair. I looked directly at Carter, my eyes locking onto his. You want to talk about the real world, Carter? I asked softly. In the real world, you do not secretly access a sibling emergency fund and steal a $5,000 life savings while your sister is walking down a freezing highway with nowhere to sleep. You took my last $5,000, Carter. You wanted me to starve. You wanted me broken. Carter opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came out. He looked down, his face flushing dark red. He knew I had him. He knew they were completely destroyed. You made your choices, I said, looking at all three of them. Now you will face mine. Nathaniel pulled a crisp, single-page legal document from his folder and placed it in the center of the table. He uncapped a luxury fountain pen and laid it next to the paper. These are the terms of your surrender, Nathaniel announced. First, the trust owns a luxury 2-bedroom apartment in downtown Missoula. You will immediately sign over the deed of that property entirely to Nora, removing any and all association the Thorne family has with it. Second, you will repay the stolen $250,000 to the trust in full within exactly 90 days. Evelyn gasped, her composure finally shattering. 90 days? That is impossible. We do not have that kind of liquid cash. To pay that back, we would have to liquidate the company's assets. We would have to sell the catering trucks, the warehouse, everything. It will completely bankrupt Thorne Events. Then I suggest you start selling, Nathaniel replied coldly. Because if that money is not back in the trust account by day 91, I will personally hand this forensic audit over to the district attorney. You will face criminal charges, and you will go to federal prison. The choice is yours. Evelyn looked at me, her eyes brimming with angry, humiliated tears. The woman who had controlled every aspect of my life, who had treated me like a worthless servant, was finally experiencing the terror of complete powerlessness. You are destroying our legacy, Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling. You are ruining the Thorne family name. How can you do this to your own blood? I leaned forward, resting my hands on the mahogany table. I looked her right in the eyes, feeling absolutely nothing but sweet, pure liberation. I am not ruining the Thorne family name, I said, repeating the exact words she had used to banish me. I am stripped of your name, remember? If I walk out that door, I am dead to you. Well, consider me a ghost. And ghosts do not care about your legacy. I gestured to the pen. Sign the paper, Evelyn. Or go to prison. Cameron broke down weeping. He reached for the pen with shaking hands and signed his name. He handed the pen to Carter, who signed it quickly, not daring to look up at me. Finally, Carter slid the paper to my mother. Evelyn stared at the document for a long time. Her empire was crumbling. Her golden child was exposed as a thief. Her obedient husband was a weeping mess. With a shaking hand, she picked up the pen and signed the surrender document. We are done here, Nathaniel said, gathering the papers and placing them safely back into his briefcase. I turned around and walked toward the glass doors. I didn't look back. I didn't say goodbye. I walked out of that law firm, stepped out into the crisp Montana afternoon, and took a deep breath of fresh air. For the first time in my 28 years of life, I was completely, beautifully free. 2 months later, I was sitting by the large bay window of my beautiful new downtown Missoula apartment. The afternoon sun was streaming in, casting a warm golden glow across the hardwood floors. On the desk in front of me sat Grandma Cora's vintage typewriter. I was brewing a fresh cup of coffee, listening to the quiet hum of the city below. It was a kind of peace I had never known existed. The fallout for my former family was absolute and devastating. True to Nathaniel's word, the 90-day deadline was absolute. In order to scrape together the $250,000 to avoid federal prison, Evelyn and Cameron were forced into a fire sale of Thorne Events. They had to liquidate the warehouse, sell off the fleet of luxury catering vans, and lay off their entire staff. In a tight-knit community like Missoula, secrets do not stay buried for long. Word quickly leaked out in the local business circles about the sudden, desperate liquidation. Rumors of financial fraud and embezzlement spread like wildfire among the wealthy elite. The clients who had booked high-end weddings for the following summer panicked and pulled their contracts, demanding their deposits back. The company's reputation, the precious legacy my mother had sacrificed my mental health to build, was completely obliterated in a matter of weeks. Thorne Events officially filed for bankruptcy shortly after. Carter's life unraveled just as spectacularly. Without his inflated executive salary and his mother's company to hide his incompetence, his luxurious lifestyle collapsed. He was forced to sell his expensive sports car to pay off credit card debts. When his wealthy fiancée found out that he was broke and implicated in stealing from his own sister, she called off the wedding and left him. I watched all of this unfold from afar, reading the occasional local news blog or hearing whispers from old acquaintances. I felt no joy in their destruction, but I also felt absolutely no pity. It was simply the inescapable consequence of their own actions. The universe had finally handed them the bill, and it was time to pay. One evening, my phone buzzed. It was a voicemail from an unknown number. I listened to it out of curiosity. It was my father, Cameron. His voice was raspy and desperate. He begged me to call him back, asking for a small loan to help them keep the massive family house, crying that they were going to lose everything. I sat there in my warm apartment, looking at the voicemail icon. I remembered the freezing concrete of the front porch. I remembered the locked door. I pressed the delete button, blocked the new number, and went back to writing my script. I had closed that chapter forever. With the trust funds securing my living expenses, I was finally able to dedicate 100% of my energy to my passion. I didn't have to steam tablecloths or endure daily psychological warfare. I just wrote. That small independent production studio in Seattle followed through. They loved the short film script I had pitched. I traveled to Seattle for a week to assist with the pre-production, and that is where I met Julian, the young, visionary director, and Stella, the fiercely intelligent producer. We bonded instantly. We spent late nights in cramped editing bays, eating cheap pizza and debating character arcs until 2 in the morning. They didn't care about my background or my family name. They respected me for my words, my work ethic, and my heart. One night, after a particularly grueling but successful day on set, Julian raised a plastic cup of cheap beer in a toast. To Nora, he smiled, his eyes genuine. The girl who writes the best damn dialogue in the Pacific Northwest. Stella clinked her cup against mine. We need more voices like yours, Nora. Do not ever stop writing. Sitting there, laughing with people who truly saw my value, I realized something profound about the concept of family. Blood does not make a family. Blood is just a biological coincidence. True family is not the people who demand your obedience in exchange for basic respect. True family is the people who leave the door unlocked for you in the cold. It is the people who encourage your dreams instead of burning them down. Julian and Stella became my chosen family. They became the brothers and sisters I never had. I returned to Missoula to finish my next feature-length screenplay. I framed the letter from Grandma Cora and hung it directly above my writing desk. Every time I hit a roadblock in my script, or every time a tiny shadow of self-doubt crept into my mind, I would look up at her elegant cursive handwriting. Write your movies, my brave girl. Write your own ending. She had given me the tools to escape a toxic prison, but I was the one who had to walk through the fire to claim my freedom. My parents had told me that I was dead to them. In a way, they were absolutely right. The frightened, obedient, invisible daughter they created was dead. And the woman who rose from those ashes was unstoppable. My story was no longer a tragedy written by someone else. It was a triumph, and I was finally holding the pen. My brother Carter recently tried reaching out again through a fake Facebook account, begging me to help pay for our dad's medical bills since their company went completely bankrupt and they lost their health insurance. Part of me feels a tiny sting of guilt, but another part remembers standing outside in the cold with absolutely nothing. So, tell me, Reddit, am I wrong for ignoring them and leaving them to deal with the mess they created? Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out on more true stories like this. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one of them.